This video looks at how better food distribution can help us overcome this problem. For instance, United Nations data show there are almost 2,800 calories produced on the planet per person per day. This is more than enough for everyone to live a healthy life. However, because our food is unevenly distributed, and because we waste roughly a third of our food, there are about 870 million hungry people worldwide. Meanwhile, another 1.5 billion adults are overweight or obese. Arguments about food distribution date back to the 1980s when the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen published the groundbreaking book Poverty and Famines. In it, Sen argued that food insecurity is not caused by a lack of food so much as a lack of economic and political power that allows citizens to demand food in a global market that includes the ultra-poor and the ultra-rich. There are at least 3 ways experts think we can correct this imbalance. First, some point out that since the US uses about 40% of its corn for ethanol, we have a conflict of food versus fuel, and more food would be available if the US dropped this policy. But there are 2 key counter-arguments. First, producing ethanol only uses the sugar in the corn and leaves protein-rich byproducts that are fed to animals. So it's not as if these grains, the vast majority of which would have been used to feed livestock anyways, have been taken out of the food system. The second reason is more important. The people on the planet who need food most are too poor and too remote to be able to afford it. So it's not certain that there would be any fewer hungry people on the planet if the American government simply stopped subsidizing ethanol. Second, it's clear that some parts of the world have too much food and some too little. So, shouldn't it be possible to simply export food from surplus regions like the US and Canada to areas that don't have enough, like Africa? Say by giving it away as food aid? Unfortunately, food aid drives down agricultural prices in the developing world, and this hurts farm incomes, which is important since most of the world's poor are farmers. As a result, most development agencies are moving away from using food aid except as short-term humanitarian relief. A third strategy is for wealthy consumers to simply eat less meat, and in particular meat that comes from resource-intensive factory farms. This is because it takes many kilograms of grain to produce a much smaller amount of meat, and so advocates for vegetarian diets argue that our grains would go further if they were eaten directly by people instead of being fed to animals. The problem with this approach, however, is how to do it. Global data show meat and dairy consumption rising fast, and while it might be nice to think that in the future humanity's diet will be less taxing, for now there is no evidence to suggest that this is going to happen anytime soon. But this doesn't mean that there is nothing we can do to better distribute food. One strategy is to maintain larger food reserves as a buffer against shortfalls. In the past, the UN funded strategic grain reserves that African nations would use to keep prices level in times of crop failure. But this program was prone to corruption and mismanagement, as well as being expensive, so it has fallen out of use. Because of this, global and national food stocks have fallen over the past 10 years to the point where today many worry we are just one bad harvest away from a major humanitarian catastrophe. As a result, calls are growing to establish food reserves that would keep prices level. While there is discussion as to who should own such stocks and how they should be governed, the fact remains that having significant food reserves is a crucial strategy to promote a resilient global food system. In the end, though, arguments about food storage, bioethanol, and North American diets needs to be seen against the bigger issue of poverty. All the food in the world won't help if people are too poor to afford it. Therefore, along with the strategies noted above, we also need to have programs that work with the poor to develop small-scale enterprises, such as loaning women in Africa enough money to set up market gardens and start raising small-scale livestock like rabbits, chickens, or goats. Properly done, such strategies give poor farmers the capability to lift themselves out of poverty.